You are now live.
Thank you. At 1:07, I'm calling the April 26th, 2022 budget hearing to order. And if we could get a roll call, this is our last budget hearing prior to the council meeting tomorrow night.
Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor
Here.
Councillor Cassett.
Here.
Councillor Lindell.
Here.
Oh, she's here.
Awesome. And Councillor Romero Worth.
I'm here. Terrific. We're all here. All right. We move to approval of the agenda. Are there changes to the agenda today?
Madam Chair, no changes to the agenda from staff.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes. Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Rivera.
Yes.
Councillor Cassett.
Yes.
Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
And Councillor Romero Worth.
Yes. All right. Again, as I mentioned, this is the last day of our budget hearings. We have, as the committee knows, but just so the public knows, we have been meeting for the last 2 weeks, 3 days a week from 1 o'clock to about 4. And this meeting will be, as the agenda indicates, we'll be taking one more vote on the approval of the overall budget for 2023. FY 2023, and we will be doing taking a look at the priorities for the American Rescue Plan Act money, federal money, and approving budget adjustment requests so that that money can be spent in this fiscal year, but it complements the FY 23 budget priorities that we will be taking final approval on tomorrow night. And just so everybody knows, the Finance Committee does this work as required by ordinance. It's required that we hold these hearings and do a vote on the budget before it can go to the governing body as a whole for final passage. And I just want to thank the committee for their work in the last couple weeks to really dive into this and understand it and ask questions and make sure that what we're doing here seems to be the right direction for the city. I also want to thank Mary, Director McCoy, and her team for all the work that they've put into this, and then also as well all the city staff, directors, and folks who have played a role in shaping it and getting it to this moment. So with that, we will go to the request for approval of operating budget and organizational chart for FY 2022-2023. And I think what we can do is if we could get a motion on the floor and then we can have discussion if the committee is interested in having discussion.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this resolution. Are there questions, discussion, things the committee would like to talk about? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering some of the information that we are still seeking. There was an analysis that I was waiting for, and I don't know if there's other councilors that were waiting for additional information. So I was hoping that we would either know where that's at or what the plan is to answer those outstanding questions.
Okay. What analysis were you looking for and who was going to deliver it? Do you know?
Finance was supposed to provide, at least this was one of the things I've been waiting for. I don't know if there was other outstanding items, but there was supposed to be an analysis related to our reserves and the forecasting around that, and also kind of the trends we're seeing. So there was going to be information that I had asked for at the beginning of this budget hearing process. So I'd like to get that.
Okay, and I think Director McCoy can speak to that right now. And then I don't know, Director, if you've put anything together for that, but I know you and I have had conversation about that. So I think you can at least speak to the question.
Madam Chair, Counselor, thank you for the question. I believe the question from the counselor is regarding our general fund reserves. The required reserves for FY23 are a little shy of 12 million, 11.9 million. So that does this budget, which is 10% of our general fund, excluding transfers. So that 10% is required by the city council. Santa Fe is a city council. The state requirement is 8%, which is lower than, so we as a city exceed what we are required to hold in reserves by the state by 2%. The state's 8% is a 1/12 increment to be able to cover operating expenses for one entire month of the fiscal year. So again, the city of Santa Fe, by our 10% requirement, we actually exceed that 1 month in reserve for the general fund. Madam Chair, Counselor, I'll stand for questions on that.
Councilwoman, did that answer your question?
Partially, I think that was helpful. If you could just provide me, there was going to be some more of a analysis around like what was removed from the reserve when we used them for, I think even fiscal year 22. There was going to be this more detailed information, and so we could understand like what was actually drawn from the reserve, how did we build it up, and then in the budget book it talked about adding 26,000, which I was trying to understand why it was so low to replenish the reserve. So if you could provide me with that, or all of the finance, I guess.
Madam Chair, Counselor, yes, those are reflected in the budget adjustments that are approved by the governing body every 2 weeks. So we can go ahead and do an accounting of that, just to highlight some of the investments that we've made. Most are one-time in nature and capital in nature, like the funding for the airport, the funding for the Southside Teen Center, the funding for the bicentennial pool, to prioritize some of those much needed one-time capital expenses in the current year. So we can go ahead and provide that. Thank you, Counselor.
That would be great. Yeah, and I think just seeing what it was before COVID, that's what I was kind of wanting to see, what has shifted with our reserve amounts before we actually went into crisis mode. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm not aware of other things the committee was interested in seeing, but if committee members have things that have not been provided, now might be a good time to. Not seeing any hands. Any other discussion? If not, I'm not seeing anybody's hand up. So if we could get a roll call, please.
Counselor Vieira.
Yes.
Counselor Rivera.
Yes.
Counselor Cassett.
Yes.
Counselor Lindell.
Yes.
And Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, that is a unanimous recommendation by the Finance Committee to adopt the FY23 budget. And again, I just want to thank everybody for the work that's gone into this. From there, we will move now to the second item on our agenda for today, which is a request for approval of an FY22 budget adjustment resolution in the amount of $15,049,631 for the American Rescue Plan Act grant We have with us today Director McCoy with the Finance Department, Director Rich Brown with the Community Development Department, Director Kira Ochoa with the Community Health and Safety Department, and Director Regina Wheeler with Public Works Department. And I think I'm just gonna turn this over, I believe, to Director McCoy, and we can dive into what's here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, councilors, for joining us, and my colleagues, the directors and our city staff. We've been hard at work to be able to bring you the FY22 budget adjustment that you have in front of you today. This is prioritized as an FY22 budget, so we can go ahead and begin deploying the funding for this 15 million, a little over 15 million into the community. I do want to set some realistic expectations as we move forward. Once the budget and review our timeline, once the budget is established, then the next step would be to meet with our procurement team, continue to meet with our city attorney team to continue to take the next steps in deploying these dollars. We want to ensure that we are crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's as we're following the procurement, and ensuring that we are following all of our city rules, city ordinances, as well as the federal ARPA guidelines that have been set forward by U.S. Treasury. By being able to establish this budget at this point in the FY22 budget, it will enable us to begin that very detailed process to work internally to make sure that we're crossing those T's and dotting our I's to then deploy these dollars into the community. That being said, we have been working on establishing these projects as a result of the community engagement that we did, a few rounds of the community engagement that both Kira and Rich and the Cerise Consulting led us through. And so, Andy, if you want to go ahead and share the PowerPoint, we'll jump into the details of this package in front of you. Next slide, please. So here we have a bit of a highlight on the City of Santa Fe's 15 million in the ARPA funding and how this has been prioritized. As you will recall, the ARPA is a program that was established by the federal government to provide support to local governments, state and local governments, in responding to both the economic and the public health impacts of the pandemic, in our efforts to contain the impact on our communities, on our residents, and our businesses. The City of Santa Fe's plan to deploy our 15 million, actually, we've been able to break it up into these very important categories that were established through our community engagement process. So as you can see here, the children, youth, and support services, community health and safety, and economic health were the top 3 priorities, and where the lion's share of the 15 million will be invested. These were the top 3 priorities as identified through our community engagement process. We have also identified some other priorities for the city that were also identified in the community engagement, but that fall into a public infrastructure category, and of course the administrative expenses to ensure that we are crossing all our T's and dotting all our I's when we are tracking this important federal funding. So we are using, following our constituent engagement and that data collection effort to better understand the needs of our Santa Fe residents and the priorities that they indicated for us. That being said, as we can see here, the bulk of our 15 million is being spent in the community health and safety. So close to 7 million or 46%. That really does involve key programs related to guaranteed income, programs related to housing support for the Midtown emergency shelter, unsheltered homeless, and other housing support along the housing spectrum. Additionally, we have invested 4.3 million, or about 28% of the 15 million, into important key economic health initiatives like small business support, creative youth program, as well as technical business assistance and job training. And we look forward to hearing from Rich and his team about those important initiatives today. We also have prioritized a little over $1 million for children and youth and support services. These are very important and timely projects related to where we're at after the pandemic, including early childhood job development, navigation, and community resiliency, a pilot, as well as college and career and youth workforce core. We look forward to hearing from our colleague Julie Sanchez about that, those important initiatives, and from hearing from Rich Brown about the youth workforce core. We also have Regina Wheeler and her team from Public Works joining us today to discuss the public infrastructure, about 1.7 million or 11% to be invested in public infrastructure projects like parks and trails, about 1.3 million for that, as well as Rich's team that is joining us to discuss the phase 2 of the public Wi-Fi. Phase 1 was originally, we saw come through in CARES Act funding a little over a year ago. That being said, the final expenditure in these categories are the administrative expenses. Those administrative expenses, again, will help us to be able to procure these funds, review legal eligibility, and then manage all of these different projects that you see before you throughout the term of the agreement. The funds have to be obligated by the end of December of 2024, according to the U.S. Treasury guidelines. Next slide, please. This slide shows a table of the projects that I discussed earlier as broken out by these investment priorities that were identified throughout the community engagement process. So this is a handy reference for us as we move through discussing the projects as we move forward. Next slide, please. This slide shows the fact that we are deploying 15 million to targeted areas and that we have been responsive to the top 3 priorities as determined in the community engagement, again, community health and safety, children, youth support services, as well as economic health. Next slide, please. So the next part of the presentation is a group presentation. We'll go through each of the different presentations. So for this point in time, I'll turn it over to Julie Sanchez to walk us through this project related to early child care, job development, navigation, and community resiliency.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, counselors. Thank you for that great introduction, Director McCoy. So this is a early child care, job development, navigation, and community resiliency pilot. Really, it's training and developing more child care workers. One of the things we saw in our community engagement was there's a lot of interest and need for an expansion of early child care workers as well as early child care services. So the project is really looking at committing around $300,000 per year for up to 3 years to subsidize students who will be attending the community college to obtain credentials in, the much needed child care services. Funding will also be provided for an internship coordination, mentorship, and apprenticeship payments, as well as cohort navigation, and we're looking at additional support services. So for that, that's kind of the gist of this particular pilot project. I'll stand for questions if anybody has any.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, if we go through and present all of the different projects, different portions of particularly affordable housing or housing support, in some cases are interrelated, and we do want to be able to present all of the different projects. We have about 16 different projects.
That's fine, Director. I was just going to ask you how to handle this, and I do think it's better to lay it all out on the table, and then we can discuss any of the items folks are interested in.
Andy, if you can go to the next slide. The next slide is outlines the priorities as related to the guaranteed income expansion and the community cash assistance. Julie, do you mind walking us through this as well?
Absolutely, Madam Chair, Director McCoy. So the guaranteed income expansion and community cash assistance pilot will continue a partial year of funding for our current guaranteed income students. Additional resources for them will also come from other funding sources. The program is also going to add a second cohort of a mix of one-time cash assistance payments, as well as an ongoing short-term cash assistance to eligible community members. And we'll be utilizing our Connect network of navigators to get our community members connected to that assistance. And we can go on to the next one.
Madam Chair, this is the beginning of, and counselors, this is the beginning of 3 projects related to housing support across the spectrum of housing needs. Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, Director McCoy. So this is a project on solutions for unsheltered homelessness. And really what we're thinking about doing with this funding is really contract services for encampment cleanups, contract services for nonprofit providers to house unsheltered folks and provide services at campsites. And then also looking at contracting for hygienic portable toilets, et cetera. Next slide.
Madam Chair, counselors, this slide, I would like to turn it over to Alex Ladd. It's $600,000 investment in continued operations for the Midtown Emergency Shelter Services.
Thank you, Director McCoy. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This project, I think everyone's pretty well familiar with. This is the emergency shelter that the city stood up at the beginning of Sorry, I just realized my audio doesn't work very well on this computer. The beginning of the pandemic, we've had some great successes. We have a new executive director over there. We've built some really good capacity among the provider. We created an actual nonprofit from scratch to run Consuelo's Place with the help of the New Mexico Coalition on Homelessness. So we, at this point in time, we had CDBG funds available to cover a partial expenses for the shelter, but the ARPA funds will be used to make up the rest to provide another year of operations. And of course, this type of use fits in very naturally with the ARPA requirements.
Next slide, please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the next request is to provide a similar amount of support to function in the same way that we provided the CARES Act from the state of New Mexico last year, to subsidize the purchase of the Santa Fe Suites to be converted into long-range housing. So we are looking at the Lamplighter Inn as our second project to do the same thing. So this is an underused, aging motel property that's actually very cool. I think the mid-century design is awesome, but it will be renovated and converted into 58 apartments, small apartments, some studio apartments, some one bedrooms for folks, both market rate renters who just can't compete in the marketplace, but also a quarter of the units will be set aside for special needs renters. So these are the folks who are most likely either transitioning out of experiencing homelessness, or they have been in an unstable housing situation. Providing this support at the site will be our services provider, I believe, is LifeLink. The owner will be JL Gray, which is a for-profit property management company that specializes in tax credit property management. So they have lots of experience with these types of populations. And this property will serve to take some of the folks from Midtown, as well as some of the other people who are ready for longer term housing, and our marketplace just simply does not have the available inventory. So we also expect we'll get some renters with public housing Section 8 vouchers.
Thank you, Alex. Madam Chair, councilors, the next project we'd like to highlight for you is for a $400,000 continuation of the public Wi-Fi project that we initially began in 2020. And I'll turn it over to Director Brown for some more details.
Madam Chair, members of the council, good afternoon, and thank you, Director McCoy. As Director McCoy said, this is our second phase of the work we've been doing to provide public Wi-Fi in our economically distressed neighborhoods. We've already done all the public buildings, and we are now just finishing up one of the mobile home parks in the South Side. We have a lot more to go, and so this funding will help us achieve that goal, and we're hoping to have it all done by 2024. So this is what this 400,000 is for, and based upon the Treasury expenditure category, it fits under household assistance.
Thank you, Director Brown. I'd like to ask if Director Williams, Brian Williams, is on the call to walk us through the next project, the Assistance for Vulnerable Populations. Brian, are you on the call? Great.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councilors. The vision I have for this funding is to have the ability for emergency management to provide support to other departments to address crisis needs in vulnerable populations. And this would include things like sleeping bags, tents, essential supplies. We envision providing single-use, little small canister fire extinguishers to help potentially mitigate the risk of folks having fires in their encampments. This will enable us to, in essence, rapidly respond to crisis needs as we discover them. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Williams. The next three projects Director Brown will be reviewing with us all relate to the economic health as we are, this is one of the key areas that we are investing in the ARPA funding.
Thank you, Director McCoy. Yeah, this is a start of a couple of programs that we are identifying through the Treasury category of technical assistance, counseling, and business planning. And it'll be primarily focused on businesses that were affected by the COVID economic downturn. And so we plan to work with the county and some foundations and some of our local business advisory ecosystem partners and the COG to have set up some programs already that we can join in and collaborate with for the city of Santa Fe for various different small businesses in different areas of that are specific for equity, et cetera. And so we will look at business advisory, business planning. There's one program that we're looking at that could be possibly small business working loans with one of our local partners to help us sort of keep a sustainable path going for these small businesses that have been struggling through the pandemic and where we are now.
Next slide, please.
Okay. Our next slide here is for job training. Our job training ideas for the ARPA spending assistance to unemployed or underemployed workers. It actually spans a very large spectrum from rising junior and senior students who are, we're working for how to create this economic mobility process that I've been talking about recently into what do we do with workers, essential workers, people who are pivoting, people who are underemployed and our underserved communities. And so there's a myriad of programs that we are looking to partner with to move forward with on job training, workforce development, and on the student side, we're calling it work-based learning. That's the gist of the job training that's there. I think there's one more. This next one is specifically to our rising junior and senior students. And again, it's called work-based learning. And we're working on a partnership with the public school systems to create this college and career youth corps. If you think about what happened long ago in the New Deal that President Roosevelt had done, where they got young people involved in work progress programs. And this will be something like that, working with small businesses. So you can see the closed loop where business advisory can also get some internships and extra capacity in their growth path. And so this Career and College Youth Program would work with small businesses, and we'd target those companies and the junior, seniors, and recent graduates to find work-based learning for them, so that we know that they have opportunities to stay and work in the city.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next slide, please, Andy. Thanks. The next project that we wanted to highlight for you is operational assistance for our nonprofit organizations that have really been key to providing vital community services throughout the pandemic. I'll ask our colleague Julie to walk us through this project.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you, Director McCoy. So this ARPA project is for nonprofit operational support. One of the really vital ways we were able to provide services during the pandemic was through our nonprofit providers. And because they had been significantly hit by the pandemic, both in terms of staff losses, not being able to fundraise, not being able to support themselves, we have a lot of organizations that are at high risk for closing down their operations, and a large amount of nonprofit providers have really had to cut down their services because of the pandemic. And so we've also seen incredibly high turnover from overburdened executive directors, more than I've ever seen in my entire career. And so really we want to work with our nonprofits who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and financially impacted to see if we can provide them some sort of financial relief.
Thank you. Madam, next slide, please. Julie, if you want to continue, thanks.
Thank you, Director McCoy. There's also another need for behavioral health and community violence intervention services. And really, community violence has been on the uptick in our community over the last 2 years. And so we've been working really diligently with other departments, including the police department, as well as the mayor's office, to come up with strategies on how to address issues of community violence. And so one of the recommendations was really funding a peer navigation program to reach and support communities who've been not only impacted by COVID, but also that have been impacted by violence. And that includes everything from gun violence to domestic violence and all of the things in between. And then so there's also an additional piece to this around behavioral health and supporting a growing amount of building our capacity of navigators who support behavioral health interventions.
Thank you. I'll turn the floor over to Director Wheeler for the next two important investments in our city facilities and our city parks and trails system.
Thank you so much, Director McCoy, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is an additional funding of continuing the COVID safety retrofits for city facilities as we return to work and continue to deal with some risks at some levels. You know that we've already retrofitted all of our HVAC systems to use the MERV 13 high filtration filters, and those need to be replaced monthly. I was actually thinking in this wind, we probably are replacing them twice a month these days. But so we'll need to have additional filters on hand to keep up with those timely replacements, as well as bring additional ones of those medical grade air filtration units that you've seen around city facilities particularly into the council chambers and other places where the public and staff will meet. And then other miscellaneous improvements that departments request. Some departments have had us raise up cubicle walls, another foot or so, and we'll just this will give us the funds to meet those needs of employees. and the public and keep everybody safe. Next slide. And then this is a $1.3 million appropriation to continue to invest in our parks where people can safely recreate outdoors without the risk of sharing germs with others. And I just wanted to put this in context. The governing body has in the last year allocated quite a bit of funds for enhancements to our parks, which really helps us in this time in our community health endeavors, as well as our family-friendly and vibrant community endeavors. The governing body has already funded the rehabilitation of all of our tennis courts. That was a significant investment. The governing body has already funded the bathrooms being repaired at the MRC, already funded pickleball court conversion, we've already been underway with our tree planting initiatives, playground equipment repairs, sod for the plaza, gates to prevent nefarious activities at parks at night. So this is another piece of this governing body continuing to invest in our community health and recreation by investing $1.3 million of this money to renovate a baseball field at Regal Park. This is a big project and really near and dear to the community's heart, as well as to fund repairs to trails and parks equipment. And that's all I have on that one.
Thank you, Director Wheeler. Next to last, if we can have Director Williams walk us through. His department has led the city efforts to make sure that we have the right equipment and supplies for COVID mitigation to mitigate the spread of COVID. This is a continuation of that funding, but I'll turn it over to Director Williams to walk us through this as well.
Thank you, Director McCoy, Madam Chair, councilors. This is pretty straightforward. This is funding to continue to support our PPE supply. And then of course, some of the other facilities that we have, the hand sanitizing stations are located at about 35 locations throughout the city. Additionally, we have some PPE that, we obviously got over the last years, but we need to be prepared should we see another surge or a new variant. We need to be able to move swiftly to address that, particularly with face masks. So again, this is pretty straightforward. And that's it.
Thank you, Director Williams. Lastly, we have a little under $1 million to dedicate to the effective management and oversight of the $15 million of the federal grant money. Primarily, this funding will be used to ensure compliance with legal, regulatory, and other requirements. The funding, the grant actually allows the use of up to 10% for administrative expenses. The city has elected to use a little bit less than that, a little under 7%, about 6.6, to be able to dedicate the majority of the grant funding to the projects that you have heard about from my colleagues earlier today. That being said, this funding will assist us to develop the policies and procedures to make sure that we are using the ARPA funds appropriately, comply with any type of requirement or the terms and conditions of the grant award, to comply with our own city rules, like the city's procurement policy, as well as assist us in maintaining and establishing the actual grant documentation in our financial system. In addition to that, it will assist the departments with managing the projects and preparing expenditures as well. Madam Chair, with that wraps up our overview of what is contained in this requested budget adjustment of a little over 15 million. At this point, all of us are prepared to stand for questions.
Thank you, Director McCoy and all the directors for your presentations. I think we did talk about and I think this was mentioned a couple times as we were going through the priorities. There are federal requirements about what this money can and can't be spent on. And I'm wondering if Director McCoy, you might want to give us a broad brush, quick sense of how that works. I mean, I'm sure there's, as I recall, there are millions, maybe thousands of pages of regulations on this, but maybe the Reader's Digest version of how to understand how this money can and can't be used.
Yes, Madam Chair, you are not too far off in your estimate of the number of pages of the federal guidelines for this particular set of funding. I think what is beneficial to the city at this point is the U.S. Treasury has released their final rule related to the ARPA grant awards for local government. So we're very appreciative to our city attorney's office, Marcos Martinez in particular, very grateful to him for assisting us with reviewing that final rule and weighing in to review these projects as well. That being said, there are very specific guidelines of what is allowable and what is not allowable. I think in the past, Director Ochoa and Director Brown have presented in a few different forums on this. We are, the primary purpose of these funds is to continue as was CARES. The CARES Act funding was primarily an emergency response to the initial outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. This continues the work that communities have done across the country in response, not just to the public health emergency, but to the impacts of what the public health emergency has done, the economic impacts, the social policy, the social impacts that we have seen. So that's why you see before you today a package primarily focused on those areas related to children and youth services, related to economic health, related to community health and safety, both physical safety as well as safety in the sense from the continued ongoing pandemic that we are with.
Okay, and just a reminder that that first money that you were talking about was about 17.5 million CARES Act money that we pushed out the end of last year, if I'm remembering right?
Madam Chair, that is correct. We actually processed about 17.5 million in 3.5 months in calendar year 2020.
Right, and that was a big lift. So congrats to everybody involved in that. And now we're on to kind of, as Director Brown would say, the next tranche. And one of my new favorite words, as everybody knows. And that is this 15 million that you've just gone through. So we can now just go to questions for the committee. I think I'm done kind of setting the table, and if committee members have specific questions, things they want to discuss. Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Let me get this pulled back up on my computer. It's a question for Ms. Sanchez on the childcare portion. Are you there, Julie? Yeah, okay, I see you. Is this, I was just a little, the information that I have looked just a little bit different from what the screen share was. Is this, you said it's a program to train people to be certified to work at a child care facility?
So Madam Chair, Councillor Lindell, so it is a program that's really built to encourage folks to get into the early child care field. It's also provides support services to those individuals. We're working on developing a quick certification program to fill in the needs. And then one of the big pieces that's different about this program than kind of what's happening nationally is there's an intern or a mentorship and apprenticeship payment piece that's attached to it.
I think that's terrific. The thing I'm a little bit concerned about is, do we have an existing curriculum?
Chair, Councilor Lindell, there is an existing curriculum. One of the things we're looking at is seeing how we can tailor that curriculum to be as comprehensive, but also as flexible and potentially a shorter kind of certification type program that we can put in place. Because right now, if you're a full-time student, it takes generally about 2 years to complete the program. But with a lot of the students we're wanting to attract into this program, we want to do things after hours. We want to do things virtually. We want to allow for individuals to be able to catch up on the weekends if they need to. So yeah, there is a curriculum in existence. We're just trying to be flexible with it and see how we can get as many folks into the program and graduated as possible.
So does that curriculum, because it does have a certification with it, is that a state curriculum, or is it a community college curriculum?
So Councilor Lindell, my understanding is that it's a community college curriculum that is, I don't want to say granted or overseen, but it's, got the stamp of the approval by the state.
Okay. So considering the money, and maybe I'm going too far into the weeds here, but considering the money that we're dedicating on this, do we have any estimate of expenditure per student that this is going to take? So in other words, how many students do we think we could, under optimal conditions, get through this program for $900,000? How many new certified childcare workers?
So Councilor Lindell, that is an incredibly important question. And right now, I believe we're looking at a cohort of, in total, about 30 apprentices going through the program. And I believe that's based per year for the program. So we're looking at maybe close to around 100 individuals that would be graduating after the 3 years.
Okay, so that, just using cowboy math, that comes out to about $10,000 per student. Is the dedication on this to tuition, stipend, both? Do we know?
So Councilor Lindell, you're just giving me all the good questions today.
These are just big fat pitches right over the plate.
Yeah. So really it's going to be covering a majority, I would say probably 90% of the funding, if not 100%, would be to cover the payments, the mentorship and apprenticeship payments.
Okay.
As well as some of the internship coordination. But yeah, majority of it's going to go to payments.
Well, Ms. Sanchez, I liked all your answers. So thank you very much. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Mayor Weber, your hand is up. I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on that or you're just waiting in line to.
I'm waiting in line after Counselor Cassett.
Okay. And we did have Councilwoman Villarreal, and it looks like we may have lost her. Anybody know? She's been having computer issues.
Yeah, I'm working with her now, Madam Chair.
All right. Well, you know what? Let's just hold for a minute and see if we can get her back. She said her computer froze again. So I don't want her to miss what we're talking about.
Madam Chair, she's logging back on. She just has to enter her password, okay?
Okay, we'll just wait just a minute longer. It's fine. There she is. Okay, we have Councilwoman Villarreal back. Councillor Cassett, you're up.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to add a couple things on the childcare piece. That's, as many of you are probably aware, that's something I've really been working on. And I wanted to add that one of the really cool features of this program that's really interesting is the ability to start infusing childcare workers into the field immediately. So this is a really large problem that we're seeing among childcare providers. And I know a lot of the conversations that have been happening is how can we support the existing childcare centers that are having a hard time staffing up. And so this not only helps build individuals into that professional pipeline, but will also allow potentially some more support for people to expand hours, to give teachers the ability. One of these positions that they frequently talk about is a floater position among preschools, because kids have challenges and a person will need to step out, a teacher will need to step out with a kid, or they need to go to the bathroom, and there's these really strict ratios that they need to be keeping. So these floater positions are also really important, while also providing that real life educational experience. So I'm really excited about this program. And I really want to thank Julie for all of her work in shepherding this through. And also, I think it's important to note that the city's dollars are not the only dollars that will be coming into play here. This is a partnership with the community college, as well as I know that there are private donors that are also interested in this program, and discussions with how potentially the state may eventually invest in this program. So I know that I have waxed poetic about the importance of childcare in the community in many a meeting, so I will save it now. But I did just want to add that. I think one of my big questions, what's really interesting, and obviously with the childcare workforce development, I'm more intimately familiar than some of these other really exciting opportunities to be piloting some innovative programs. And I think that it would be short-sighted of us if we did not look at how we evaluate these programs and how we potentially set ourselves up for state dollars, federal dollars, other grants that might allow us to continue these programs past the ARPA timeline. So I am curious to hear, I know it's a bit of a general question, but from the department directors, so probably Kira and Rich, you would be the ones to speak to this, about how we are going to be looking at evaluation and really setting ourselves up as these being investments in long-term programs, as opposed to one-time short-term fixes. If that makes sense.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Cassett, if I could take the first part. Great question, because yes, we want to see these as not one-time, one and done things, but lay tracks that would allow us to receive future funding. I think obviously the ARPA funds themselves, we have not carved out or budgeted evaluation. Just the administration alone on this number of dollars is going to take a significant investment. But I think we do have funds available. I have funds available in my community health and safety budget that we can look at evaluation on. And then with our community partners, as you've rightly pointed out on the childcare project, we have evaluation capacity or capacity to ask for funding on that. And thanks for raising it. And you should look at it early on and build it and hard bake it. Is that a term? Hard bake it, hardwire it into, it's not, I do that all the time, into what we're doing. In the county partnership we have via Connect, we already have an evaluator, and we're very interested to look at sort of dosage, if you will, around, okay, you get navigation services, you get assistance with your rent, now you get maybe a guaranteed income for 6 months to bridge you between this and that. What kind of outcomes do we see there? And we do have an evaluation contract in place on that we could add to for that purpose. But I think as we look at all our projects, I really appreciate you mentioning that. I love evaluation, and too often we don't think about evaluation until the 11th hour. So appreciate the comment and the question.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassidy, thank you for the question. It's a good one. I think on my side, from the economic health standpoint, I look at it in two different areas. So the small business support that we are planning to do, which is technical advisory and business advisory, the key measurement there is return on investment. So if our ROI is really high, that means that it translates into GRT, because the business will start to grow, and that brings more revenue to the city that we can use for our general fund and economic development activities. So on the small business side, it's sort of measuring the ROI of our advisory and the growth of business, and that in turn comes into GRT growth. On the workforce side, it's a big cycle. You know, businesses are being successful, they need to hire, but at the same time, the investment we're making right now for this work-based learning and jobs training, again, is where we're hoping that over the next 2 years, we're able to find more partners to grow, keeping in mind that the ARPA funds is almost a pilot investment, an impact investment to businesses that these workers will be placed, because ultimately the worker will be able to take a full-time job at this company or business, and they'll be able to support them fully. We might have to subsidize in some way, but we're sort of piloting this program so we can seed it so that when businesses are growing, these folks are in the job workplace, and business are able to sustain themselves and keep them on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of how we look at the measuring of the success of the programs.
Thank you so much, Rich. Two separate responses, I suppose. One would be, to the point of funding the evaluation. That's something that I definitely would like to see whether some budget adjustments need to come through depending on, the levels of those, but perhaps a continued conversation to have. I know that I will be requesting a lot of these programs, updates be coming through quality of life. So that will be interesting to, or important to really keep track of. So I know we're not dealing with that directly right now, but that's something that I would like to see in the near future is making sure that we are adequately funding some evaluation. As Kira mentioned, there's some dollars potentially available, and hearing about that. Rich, I just had a follow-up question. This is for my edification about, looking at ROI and GRT, and maybe Mary, you're able to weigh in on this as well. How well are we able to track essentially our investment in GRT growth? Because GRT growth in the city occurs on a number, for a number of different reasons. Some of them directly related to us, some of them potentially not. I'm sorry, my cat is really wants to be part of this conversation. So I was hoping to, and again, this can be a larger conversation on another day, but understand that makes sense to me that, this is the measurement that we look at, but how we're able to kind of tease out all of the different variables that go into that, and understand what our dollars are really doing in that regard.
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassidy, that's a very good question, and the ROI has a micro and a macro aspect to it. So this technical advisory will allow us to see businesses that are hiring, see growth in new areas like e-commerce. We'll see other areas where, we're talking about micro businesses, we're talking $5 million of revenue or less. So they're not necessarily an industry cluster, they're small businesses in your neighborhoods. And so we will see that uptick in the way customers are interacting with that business, and then also whether or not they are continuing the relationship they have with some of the advisors that they may be connected with. So it is a little hard to measure it now, but we'll see it once we get the engagements going, because the advisors have to report back to the organizations that they may be working for, and we'll see some of that uptick. Some are very confidential in what they do, but we'll be able to reach out to the companies that have been connected with directly. So I think it's a great idea to bring it to EDAC on a sort of probably half-year basis, and also the quality of life to look at the economic health of some of the businesses that are coming along. Additionally, additionally, if I could, then Director McCoy, who does, I think, a quarterly financial update, we will see that moving through when Dr. White does his economic update, because he has them separated by NAICS codes. And so we'll see some little uptakes on some of the areas from a NAICS code standpoint where the change will happen in business growth.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Interesting. My nerdiness is coming out. I'm really excited to watch this. So thank you so much. One quick question for Director Ladd regarding Lamplighter. Sorry, one second. Sorry, very active animal household today again. You had mentioned, so 1 quarter will be set aside for special needs. The rest will be, I think you had said market rate, but are they market rate or are they be affordable housing?
They're below market rate, and the incomes of the renters living there will also be restricted to 80% and below, I believe. But when I say market rate, I mean, these are, maybe the better word would be, these are workforce renters. So these are folks who are employed, most likely. They possibly are subsidized through another rental subsidy source, but they're, they just can't afford to compete in the current housing marketplace. I just want to really make that clear that this is a mixed income model, much like Santa Fe Suites.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Thanks so much. And then my last question would be for Director Wheeler. Really excited to see the investments for Regal Field and updating those baseball fields. That's really, really important. I know that there has been some discussion in the community, specifically with the Santa Fe Little League, and they're raising private dollars to be doing some of the work on Regal. And I was curious about, one, the coordination between what we're doing and what's going on with these private fundraising. And then I know that sometimes can be a little bit complicated for us. And I was hoping Mary could speak to that a little bit in terms of how we are able to accept those dollars and really utilize them to amplify what we are investing in with ARPA.
Thank you so much for the question, Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett. Actually, we have taken private funds and deployed them in parks before. We got a $60,000 gift for the dog park not too long ago and deployed that effectively. So we know how to work our way through that. These baseball field renovations are extremely expensive. It's on the order of $600,000 per field. So, we'll see what the privates bring to the table from that. But certainly, Melissa is very closely engaged with all of the constituents in the leagues, and she'll work closely with them to see how their contribution, how they want it spent, and how it can have the most impact. So we're happy to work with them on deploying that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really, again, really, really happy to see this investment. As you mentioned, we've invested a lot in parks recently, and that's wonderful. I'm very happy that that we're continuing to make these investments. It's really important. It has been one of the number one things I've heard since taking office is desire for upgraded parks and to continue to invest in our parks and to make sure that we're maintaining our parks. And I know that we all praise Melissa, and I'll do it again. She's really just been such a wonderful addition. So thank you to you, and thank you to her. And to continue to be providing this for our youth and our families.
Thank
I
you.
don't believe, of course, I don't believe I have any other questions at this time. Really, thank you to staff. I'm really excited about what's going on with ARPA. So I can't wait to get this started and deployed into the community. And as I mentioned, I look forward to hearing updates, and I'll be talking to y'all about bringing them to quality of life. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Mayor Weber.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to comment briefly on the childcare specific allocation, and then as the conversation goes on, I may be able to dip into some of these other topics as well. First, I want to give Councillor Cassett the credit she deserves, because leading up to the utilization of the ARPA funds, she was doing an outstanding job of reaching out to a variety of organizations and individuals who are very knowledgeable about childcare and family-related issues, and building a policy base from which we could operate. So a lot of the $900,000 allocation is backed up by the work that she took on to develop the opportunity and build the links with all of the other partners in this program. And as she mentioned, it is a partnership. We're working with a variety of other groups so that our $900,000 over 3 years is actually a very large multi-million-dollar commitment to adding childcare capability to our community. It's important to note, and I think it has been said, but it's worth underlining, when you look at our allocation of ARPA funds, some are often for social policy, some are often for economic development. This one is in both camps. We are actually able, through childcare support, to increase the pool of childcare workers so that families, moms, kids can get more support with their family needs. It'll be accessible, available, and affordable. And at the same time, people who are working will be able to continue their own job and personal development by having childcare. So it's one of those both and investments that makes a big difference in both the social policy realm and the economic development realm. And finally, I think it does continue our approach, which we may talk about if people raise questions about mayors for a guaranteed income. It continues an approach of saying the best way to improve our support for these issues is by finding a way to invest in the development and the capability of individuals to get into the workforce with jobs that pay a good wage and recognize their value in the market. So we are putting our money into people who will then put themselves into a position to offer childcare, which is one of the most important ways we can support families and our economy. And I really think it's a strategic investment with great partners. And I really salute again, Councillor Cassett, for pioneering the effort to do the homework to know how we could play a constructive role. And now the $900,000 will put us into a place where we're making a constructive difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And completely agree. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We
Got to
can.
regroup again.
I'm glad you're back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's frustrating. I just want to start off by saying that I really appreciated this outline and how it was broken down into different categories, and the project descriptions and how it was outlined for us. That was super helpful. And I think that this is how we want all our presentations to be set up, so that there's details, so that we don't have to keep backtracking on things. So thank you to the staff for being thoughtful about the outline and the details that you're providing. And overall, just the work. There's a lot of great programs and projects in this budget. I'm glad you listened to some of the community members that did bring up issues that they thought were important. So, and I see this in this particular budget. I just had a few clarifying questions on some of the sections, specifically starting with the guaranteed income. I'm glad we're continuing this program and that this will be a partial second year. for funding. And I was curious in terms of the vetting process, will we be using the same vetting process system and partner and questions as the last, as the first cohort?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a really great question. Now that the city is going to be potentially putting in an additional funding allocation, we have the ability to control the vetting process as well as the application process for that new potential cohort. When we received the guaranteed income funding, we were really kind of wedded to the Centers for Guaranteed Income Research, their kind of research modality and their application questions. So we do have the ability to create our own application, so we can make it much more simple and reflective of and easily accessible for our community members.
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, if I might add, this is another project which has attracted other partner interest, philanthropic interest, particularly from the Santa Fe Community Foundation. So we're excited that we might be able to supplement the cohorts that have been going through the community college who have young children, so that we can devote some of the funding to other populations also in need within the community. And again, as the description describes, through our Connect network. Our Connect navigators know their clients and the people that they're working with really, really well. We might not be able to give guaranteed income for a year to every single person being serviced by Connect, but we might be able to set up a lottery system or identify those who would, again, really, really benefit from this kind of idea of bridge funding. Maybe they are people who are going through a training program on the way to getting a job, or maybe they are people that have hit hard times but have a light at the end of the tunnel. And really, these would be funds that our Connect navigators with their expertise can help us create application processes that open up the opportunity to more than just the cohort that's been so successfully served with the Mayors for Guaranteed Income program that we've been piloting with the community college and the national project.
Great to hear. I'm glad that you all will be more involved with that and make it more appropriate for people. The last process, I think, was very intrusive of the things we were asking people that weren't really pertaining to the actual project and program. So I'm happy to see that. And then also you said that the current cohort, they're eligible to reapply. Is that correct?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's correct. They would be eligible to reapply. And actually, the hope is that we would take additional funding to support almost like a, what would you say? I'm going to say this wrong, but titrated. So, you know, to slowly kind of wean off that cohort off the funding, because when you cut somebody off so drastically from receiving that additional funds, we really want to, you know, support their financial abilities. There was also, and I'm going to be working with Director Ochoa on this, figuring out how to do some financial counseling for our current cohort, so then they are successful in managing their funding and possibly getting kind of recommendations on building their financial health.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Julie, for explaining that. It's great to hear. Let's see, moving on to just double checking on something so the Midtown Emergency Shelter Service, essentially Consuelo's Place. I'm happy to see that we'll be able to add more funding to that, because we, as Alex said, we weren't able to give them all the funding that they needed through CDBG. So I'm happy to hear that. Just want to double check the time period. This is the proposal to use the funds that would end 2024. So does that mean that we are committing to supporting Consuelo's Place in its current location until 2024?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the funding we have for the shelters for 1 year, that amount, the CDBG plus the 600 would cover the shelter expenses through June of 2023.
June of 2023. Okay, so maybe, I think we should probably adjust that. It makes it sound like we'll be breaking up the funding over 2 years to 2024. I think some of the other ones are actually real specific to when it finishes, when it will be spent down. So maybe just correct that in case someone asks about it. Let's see, so again with the, let's see, related to affordable housing, the lamplighter in conversion. Glad we were able to infuse that other aspect, the other funding that we couldn't fund through the CDBG. And so I'm just curious, this isn't really regarding the funding, but I think that needs to be a proactive community outreach. And I'm curious if any proactive community outreach has occurred so that people understand what's entails about the lamplighter, what populations it will be supporting, that there's a integrated services component with LifeLink. And so is there a plan around that to kind of do more proactive outreach to neighbors in the area?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I believe that the collaboration that will own the property and manage it is planning a big press release and some outreach as soon as the purchase is closed.
And that would happen, do you know the time frame for that?
It's imminent. It's been, the date has moved around quite a bit. But certainly knowing that ARPA funds are committed will help them as well, because the funds are intended to close that gap or offset the cost of the purchase.
Got it. And so there is a plan to then start doing more proactive communications.
Yes, the city is not directly involved with those communications because we are just partially funding the purchase. But I can certainly get more details from the project team if you'd like.
That'd be great. That would be great. I think that's going to be important to explain the different nuances of this project. And I've already gotten messages and emails from constituents about concerns. And I think if we just explain it holistically, people would have a better understanding and the need for it. So thank you. Let's see. So the next piece is, sorry, I'm scrolling the document here. The small business support, just want to get more clarity how does staff define small business? Do you all have like a metric or some kind of way of deciding who falls under that category?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, there is no official designation of small business, but as I said in one of my earlier answers, that we look at businesses that are sub 5 million, and that's almost 85% of the businesses in the city of Santa Fe. We don't have a lot of large enterprise businesses, which I consider businesses that do work on a national level, regional level, and are in growth modes or in our industry clusters. So 85% of the businesses in Santa Fe really do fit under the $5 million in revenue level. So they're all considered small businesses.
I guess I was thinking not so much about their revenue, because that ranges considerably from the different sizes. I was thinking more about number of staff. Do you all look at number of staff as a component of what is considered small?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, it still would probably fit in that category. There are some people working remotely in their homes, one person that's doing $1 million in revenue. So staff number is a consideration, and a lot of small businesses do have large staff and still would be considered small business based on that revenue target. But each one would be, I guess, designated individually if we feel that they're a business that's got 30 folks and they're making just minimum wage. And so they would still be considered a small business, and it still would probably fit into that $5 million revenue category. So,
Right. I hope in this case, and from what you wrote, it sounds like this is kind of where you're heading and helping to bridge the gap, that capital gap. I'm hoping that based on what you wrote, that you're really targeting folks that don't have access to capital, that you're able to focus on people that there aren't many options for them to seek, whether they're low interest loans or other business support. The non-traditional ones, you know, that I think get overlooked because they don't have a glossy cover. So, but they're doing great work. So I'm hoping by what you described that that's the intention.
Madam Chair, Councilor Vera, that's a good point. One of them that's not on here that I'm also considering is there's an airport road resiliency, business resiliency group that's going to help me look at sort of the immigrant population on top of the ones that I think we have one for people, BIPOC, women, Indigenous folks. And so we are looking at those folks who, one, that's why there's technical advisory. Is like, how do you access this? How do you know there are resources available? So we want to help them get more financially literate, and then also kind of give them some business acumen so that they know that this is the path you can take if you want to make sure that you have 6 weeks of payroll, or you have a balance sheet, you know how to read it, or what do I do if I get a bookkeeper, or what do I do if I have to get a loan? All those details that have to go into a loan paper, how do I do that? So this is what this technical advisory is really all about, is that giving them those tools that normally wouldn't be a part of their workday. And so these different programs provide avenues to that, and then sort of get down mostly to the road where there are, socially volatile and socially vulnerable neighborhoods where businesses are.
Excellent. Thank you. And then that leads me to the job training. I've heard really good responses to folks that got to go through that. I'm going to call it the wrong name, but it was like a creative startups. It was looking at kind of non-traditional businesses around that in that sector, and that some of those job trainings were super helpful. And there were people that would never have been considered before. So I'm curious if that's falls under small business support or other job training in your plan.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I think the one you're thinking of, that was business acceleration, where it was open to all. This is more about, there are, I'll say, 3 categories of potential job seekers: the rising juniors and seniors, and that I talked earlier about economic mobility. I want to give them a head start to figuring out where the jobs are, how to train for it, how to give them soft skills, and then put them on a path to mobility. And then we have that sort of post-high school, where there are young people who are not going to college and 4-year program. What career paths are available for them as they get out of high school? There's a lot of anxiety once you graduate if you don't have any paths forward. So that's the second category. And then the third category are those folks who are essential workers who want to pivot. There are underemployed folks here. There are people of color who are now entering back in the workforce because they might be able to get childcare so they can get a job. And so that's the areas where these job training programs will work out.
Excellent. Okay. And then related to that, college workforce and career youth workforce corps. So there is a trades component, correct? And we will be working with already existing trades, either schools or programs. The one that comes to mind is ECHO, I believe. They're still doing that. So I'm curious if you all are already connecting with already existing programs and potential population.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a good question, and it's a yes. That ECHO is a part of the programs. The public schools has a lot of really good programs that provide this economic mobility and job training. And so we're just going to partner with them. So we're not reinventing the wheel. They already have the relationships, and that's the hardest part about job training. You got to reach folks, and you have to tell them what the opportunity is. So they're already connected there. So ECHO is one of the programs. College and Careers, another one. Communities and Schools has a program, and they are actually they've already had the relationships with some of these students that will use for the job training program. So ECHO is definitely one of them from that standpoint.
Thank you. And then one thing about that, I was just curious, One thing I think had a lot of value, and I don't know if anyone's going to be continuing this program in some form, or if the city is going to support it, was Inspire Santa Fe. And I'm not saying in that iteration, but the mentorship piece. I've really heard so many parents tell me that they wish their kids were able to connect in that way from a citywide program, because right now I think it's in one of the schools. They made it smaller and it went back to, I can't think of the school that ended up starting it, but is there any component to mentorship that you all will be adding value to with this funding, or even maybe separate from this funding?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a daily double question. It's a good one, because one of the things that I learned as we were trying to form ideas and proposals is that some of the school programs and some of the independent programs had asked about, could we supply some funding for mentorship? Because it's a key thing as they bridge between getting their soft skills into getting into a job when they have a mentor who's helping them on the way. So we will be setting aside money, and I think that's why the number is larger than maybe people thought, is that we have to put aside money for those mentors who are taking time out, teachers, volunteers, et cetera, that are taking extra time out to be a part of it, and they're just as committed as we are. So the mentorship piece is definitely in there, especially on the rising junior, senior, and the sort of post-high school side of the training programs.
Thank you. Great to hear that. I'm happy to hear that. And then for the nonprofit operational support, which is, I work in the nonprofit sector, and that's really the support that nonprofits need, is operational support. So what will the application process look like in order to be considered for funding for this tranche of funding?
So Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, there's quite a few eligibility requirements for this funding. We really wanted it to be in place to support vital community services. So we're really looking at organizations that serve indigent populations, provide access to food, affordable housing, case management, addressing homelessness, personal safety, domestic violence, medical dental services, transportation, behavioral health, grief crisis services, really the whole gamut of vital services that were given to the community through the COVID pandemic. And the other piece to that is, we do have quite a number of eligibility criteria that we tried to flesh out and really be as intentional as possible. So we want to make sure that we are serving 501c3s, that they were in place, before December 31st, 2018, had at least 2 FTEs on staff as of January 1st, 2020, and that those agencies that are at risk of significantly reducing services or permanent temporary closure, including programs, would be prioritized when funding decisions are made. And there are quite a few organizations in our community that were struggling during the pandemic and that continue to struggle. And then we also have, of course, some of the financial pieces that we are fleshing out around, the decrease in net operation expenses, as well as, have seen a demand in their services.
Yeah, all of those criteria I think are good. I guess I'm just wanting to make sure our application process is not as unwieldy as it has been in the past. I think it's improved with your leadership, Director Sanchez. So I'm happy to see that. I just want to make sure that we have the actual application process. Obviously, they would have to meet the criteria, but the actual process to get all the needed pieces for applications, sometimes I'm just blown away by what we put them through. And then yet we're trying to support their capacity. So it's like this contradiction. So I hope that we're able to balance that out.
So Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, once we get our determination, we'll be releasing, my hope, fingers crossed, an RFA, so we can do multiple awards to organizations. We do really want to keep the application as easy to fill out as possible, but then also make sure we keep accountability for financial records. So we're going to ask for things like my 90s financial records, the 501c3 award letter, and there'll be other requirements that we put in place. And then we will be opening up the evaluation shortly thereafter.
Great. That's great to hear. Thank you. Moving on to the behavioral health and community violence intervention services. This was one that didn't make as much sense to me as to what it actually would support. It talked about ARU, but it didn't say specifically how it would build that capacity and how police are involved, yet still trying to do peer-to-peer support. So could someone tell me a little bit more about what you envision for this?
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, I'll let Julie get into some of the detail, but really this is sort of I can see from the description, it's a bit of a whole ball of wax description. So we're happy to parse it out a little bit. You know, as with the childcare issue, one of the #1 challenges that our behavioral health services, including our ARU, has encountered is workforce. And as we seek to develop workforce, we really also recognize in the realm of behavioral health, those who've experienced behavioral health challenges and our peers are really powerful folks that need to be brought into these services. And so part of what we envision is that, you know, I've talked to Andres and his team, and, you know, they are getting a lot of great attention because they support their folks so well. Could we work with them to do internships with ARU? Could we work with other providers in the community, St. Elizabeth's, LifeLink? I'm naming names, but that I'm not excluding others who have a need for workforce, have the ability to train folks that don't have as much experience, and then folks who might be peers or others who are interested in getting into the field who, like the childcare workforce, can't do so without also working and getting paid. They can't do unpaid internships, these folks. So part of the funding here is envisioned to go toward a program that would support on the ground internships for peer navigators, peer case managers throughout the community, including in our ARU if possible. And then Julie can talk about the other piece of the funding, which is related but a little different on the violence prevention end.
Great.
Thank you for that, Director Ochoa. So in terms of community violence, one of the big models that we've been really looking at and researching deeply is the Cure Violence model. And they're really using peer navigators, similar to what Director Ochoa is talking about, to basically build in supports for individuals who are at high risk for committing acts of violence. And so those services are really targeted to particular areas, you know, maybe certain places, you know, around encampments or around schools, or areas that have been kind of targeted for acts of, for instance, gun violence. And these individual peer navigators, of course, would be compensated for their time while also receiving training and support to be in our navigation network.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that idea of the pipeline, building the pipeline, especially with programs where I think we're already doing it now, but expanding it is utilizing some of the students that are in the health track at Capitol to be able to like connect back to ARU, and why it's important to have those peer navigators, not just peer navigators, but people in that field that look at behavioral health in connection to like what's happening in the community. So I'm happy to hear that that's the pipeline you're envisioning. Anything else you want to add to that? Is there anything else I should know?
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, this year we've invested in a small research and development project on different models for violence prevention in the community. And so we have some evidence-based models that we're looking at. And this, is around including not only peer navigators and folks that have come out of maybe violence experiences and are ready to guide younger people who out of that path, but really engaging again with our wonderful nonprofit partners who already work in this realm and are already providing good partnerships. So there's some fluidity allowed in the description here as we develop and see the recommendations that come out of that work that we funded this year.
Great. Is that the research from Ms. Andar?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think the other question that I had was, I didn't see directly how we were investing in eviction prevention. And so I was wondering if there was any pathway that you all, in terms of this funding, could see that connection or make that connection.
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, thank you for the question. As obviously this body will recall, but for the benefit of the public, the $1 million that was designated for eviction prevention out of the general fund earlier this year will match with $1 million from the county out of their ARPA funding that will be for direct cash assistance intended to prevent eviction. I actually got an email just today from somebody who's still trying to navigate, the state resources, unfortunately, that are very hard to access.
Yeah.
Though that $2 million investment, $1 million on the part of the city general fund, $1 million on the part of the county from their ARPA fund will help for eviction prevention. In addition, the guaranteed income funding and the direct funding for direct cash assistance or community cash assistance pilot is potentially funding that folks can use for rental assistance. In addition, I know Ms. Ladd has significant investment from the Housing Trust in our budget, and I'm glad we're talking about ARPA at this time, having just talked about budget last week, that will also go to that purpose.
Thank you. I think I was also thinking about like legal services. I know we were trying to get that up and running. Are we supporting that office fully? Not office, but that contractor. I don't know if anyone knows about the landlord tenant. I think it really falls under landlord tenant hotline. And if we have enough funding for that resource.
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, I don't know if Director Ladd has information on that, or it may be that Christine Mihalsic has more information on that.
Okay.
Hi, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal. I don't know if Christine's on, but we are working to finalize our contract with New Mexico Legal Aid, and we have funding both in constituent services budget and also the Office of Affordable Housing.
Okay. And you feel like that's enough funding sources?
Councilor Villarreal, it's certainly enough to get the project started because it's there's limited capacity, both who the legal aid can serve. So we'll figure out, that's part of the contract, is for them to recommend like an expansion of the project, which they would likely not be able to provide.
Okay.
But sort of after we get it started and figure out what the needs are.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then last, I agree with about tracking and how we evaluate these programs and continue them into the future, not just one-time funding. And there are performance matrix that were added. I think that's a requirement through the ARPA funding, I'm guessing. So there are some parameters that you all listed. So are those, how will those be used?
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, I can speak to the projects out of Community Health and Safety Department. All of the contracts that we issue will have reporting requirements, and we will be collecting data as we do through currently our Health and our Human Services Committee and Children Youth Commission funding on performance measures.
I don't know, yeah, Director
Madam
Brown.
Chair.
Add.
Madam
Thanks.
Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a very good question. I want to commend Director McCoy first because she helped us with our input documents. And so performance metrics was one of our inputs that we had to submit as we tried to design these program funding concepts. And so on the business side and the job training side, we do have performing metrics, but I think Councilor Cassett brought up a great question around the bigger picture around, we might have 9 programs going together, but how do you really come to a full reckoning of what they're doing? So, but we do have performing metrics on the individual level for the programs for business support and job training.
Okay, and that's mostly for reporting purposes, but it probably will also help us kind of inform how these projects will be moving forward and their success.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you all for your great work.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sanchez, with regards to early child care job development and the guaranteed income expansion, and you may have mentioned this, but are they eligible for both, for the assistance in both?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I would imagine, well, it's a great question. I would imagine they would be eligible for both. But as part of the guaranteed income pilot project, that funding actually counts towards their income. And so if they were to receive any additional funding outside of that, they would have to potentially count that as income. So it's really going to be up to them if they want to accept that funding or not. But for some of the other additional programs, they may be eligible for.
All right, and you talked about the program at the community college and giving them a certificate to come out with early childcare certificate. Do we know roughly how many vacancies there might be in and around the city?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, or Councilor Rivera, apologies. So currently, in looking at the last data I received around closures due to COVID, we had about 7 early child care centers permanently closed due to loss of workforce, and that we lost roughly about, I think it was roughly about 90 slots for children. And so getting those individuals trained would be able to support at least 180 children and roughly about 20 new slots.
All right, and how many years did you say it would take you said it was a 2-year program. I think you said something like 30 students per year.
So Councilor Rivera, it'll be about 2 to 3 years, looking at potentially 30 apprentices receiving training per year.
All right. Are they eligible to work anywhere else that we know of? I mean, I'm sure they're eligible, but are there do the public schools require an early childhood or childcare certificate to be able to work in, let's say, pre-K?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, they do. There is a certificate that's required as part of any early child care center, from private all the way to the Santa Fe Public Schools.
Right. And do you know if this program also instructs on maybe how to open up your own early child care facility?
So, Councilor Rivera, there is some actually really amazing programming that's happening in our community that helps support individuals who want to get licensed and who want to expand their operations. And so those programs already currently exist and are pretty strong in our community.
Right. And does this funding support that as well?
Councilor Rivera, no, this funding would not support that type of programming.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, if I could just add that in addition to Councilor Cassett's leadership on this, for many years, the Youth and Family Services Division has been partnering with First United Way and now Growing Up New Mexico in terms of developing, sort of identifying gaps and needs and working across the community to develop and support some of these. So we are working with Growing Up New Mexico in an array of ways, and one of them is with this program, but some of the Children Youth Commission funding and other things bring in, fill in gaps in other realms as well.
Yeah, no, I support the program. I just want to make sure that once it's all done, we get hopefully, the maximum number of apprentices through, that they have places to work, that there's a need for them. And it sounds like there is. So just wanted to clarify that. So I do support it. And thank you, Director Sanchez, for answering my questions. Thank you, Director Ochoa.
Councilwoman Cassett, did you want to add on that? I saw you chomping at the bit.
Always. Don't I always want to this topic? I just thought that it's important. Councilor Rivera brought up such an interesting point about the number of slots that are needed. And there's a really interesting report that came out in 2019 pre-pandemic about the state of childcare in our community. And they were talking about how there's only slots for 7% of the infants that are born in our community in any given year. And then what complicates this, because this has been a big conversation of how many childcare slots do we actually need in the city. And Julie did a wonderful job of pulling down the data that we can quantify. But there's been a lot of conversations about, it's just what are the hours that are available and being able to expand hours. And so it is a pretty, it's a complex question. So I just wanted to bring up some of the other conversations that have gone on around this area, is that there are slots that only go till 3 o'clock, and they would expand to aftercare, except for they don't have enough staff to provide aftercare, as well as potentially some weekend and off regular business hours potential for expansion. So I wanted to add a little bit more there. Thank you.
Good. Other questions, discussion from the committee? We do need to take action on this package of budget adjustment requests for the ARPA dollars. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Can I ask one question, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Sorry, Ms. McCoy, there's other federal dollars coming down, filtered, I think, through the state with regards to infrastructure and some other things. Are those, do we know when those will be discussed, and are they going to be part of the 22-23 budget, or are they going to be separate? Do we know how that's going to work yet? And how much of the council is going to be involved in that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, thank you for the question. I can speak generally, and I know Director Wheeler is joining us today and has done a fair bit of research in this area as well. We will be bringing that forward as a separate package at the appropriate time when those grant awards are received, and whenever those are received. If those are received in the current year, we can bring those forward in the current year, or if those are received in a future year. Director Wheeler, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
I do. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera. Actually, the Infrastructure Jobs Act money, remember, will be coming for 5 years. It actually already hit the state organizations' budgets in this fiscal year. So DOT is deploying some of those funds through grant invitations for grants. We also are getting a lot of information from our legislative delegations about grant opportunities. So almost all of that money is, if not all of it, is coming in a really different route, which is more about applying for grants or having some of our state agencies like FTA and Federal Transit Administration, Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Transportation, having more funds to deploy where they already have been supporting us through funding. So We are ongoingly getting information and developing project concepts for application to some of these special funding opportunities. Some of the funding opportunities look just like the ones we see all the time, right? DOT, good for roads. They're looking to expand their scope a little bit, maybe to deal with even just more maintenance types of activities, which they haven't normally funded. But then there's the whole realm of sort of new ideas like resiliency and reliability and sustainability and electrification. And so Neil Denton and a bunch of staff are definitely keeping our eyes open. Director Brown has been really helpful in forwarding everybody's forwarding everything they see. And we're looking at these opportunities that for good fits for the city. And certainly, as Director McCoy said, the governing body would be involved in decisions about larger projects and certainly with acceptance of the funds.
So with a grant application process, typically those come up and grants are applied for. Who's going to lead the discussion with the counselors as to which projects are probably most important for the city and for our districts?
I can give you part of that answer, and I think there's more to say too. Maybe the Mayor Weber might have something to add here. We do have capital plans that are approved by the governing body that have indicated your priorities, and we do use those. We have the Master Transportation Plan, which is created by the MPO and is adopted, that lists like the top 100 projects that we have from a road and transportation perspective. We also have the ICIP that's adopted by the governing body every year, which has quite a number and range of broad types of projects. We have like the sustainability plan, the stormwater plan. So there are a number of plans that actually really do outline capital priorities, as well as, of course, we do get ongoing input from constituents and governing body members to guide us. And then I'll just say one more thing. With increasing cost of construction these days, when we have a project that's funded, it almost is instantly these days partially funded because the costs are escalating so quickly that it's unlikely that even if we had funding 6 months ago, that it'll hold the budget of the project. So those projects are also very high priority for pursuing additional funding because we really want to get the projects deployed. They probably have a bunch of grant money relying on the fact that we deploy the projects. We don't want to lose any grant money we already had. So projects that are funded and partially funded are super high priorities for getting completed and seeking additional funding.
All right. So again, I'm not sure when discussion with the counselors would be. I know there's all these lists out there that have our priorities, but let's say like roads, only 2-3 of the counselors are on the MPO. So how would the rest of us be able to give input on really road projects or what we think is important?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera. I have been talking to the MPO and to Ramella. We're terribly understaffed in this area, and we're just doing our best to keep up with the funding opportunities we receive. But we have discussed, sort of creating a big picture presentation for you all about what are all the projects that are funded, what are all the projects that are priorities in the Master Transportation Plan, what's popped up from the traffic calming requests that we've received, some funding that we'll be doing there. So we are, but really, I think it's pretty straightforward to say that really the projects that are funded right now are the ones that we're really trying to get complete funding for and get them to the finish line. Of course, Jaguar Drive is on the list, the expansion to the airport, and a few, now we have Agua Fria, the study for, the development that's taking place there that will be added to the Master Transportation Plan. But we'll definitely bring to Public Works Council Rivera a conversation about that big picture about the roads and see if we get that in shape to bring it to the governing body as well.
Okay, yeah, just looking for a way to make sure we have input ahead of time before actually applying and definitely receiving grants. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Wheeler.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the budget adjustment request for FY '22 to incorporate these priorities with the ARPA dollars. Can we get a roll call?
Yes, Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, we are at the end of our budget hearings. And again, I just want to thank the committee for all the work that they've put in. Thank the staff for all the work they've put in. Thank, the directors and the people under you that I know have spent a lot of time working on this. And I look forward to our conversation tomorrow night as we move this FY '23 budget to final passage. And Mayor Weber, closing thoughts.
Well, just again, you're hitting the right note. Thank you to the committee. This is a lot of work, a lot of hours, homework, as well as during the hearings themselves. Takes an enormous amount of effort to grind through the budgets and the details of the budgets, and to be on top of such a large project as figuring out where we can most effectively use our city dollars in the year ahead. So I'm grateful to the chair and all the committee members for the hard work and the enormous effort and length of hours put in, and questions that you all asked were very helpful, so that anyone who was watching or listening really got a good picture of why we're doing what we're doing, not just what we're doing, but what the thinking is behind it, and what our department heads and their teams are thinking about how to improve the city in the year and years ahead. So my thanks go to you guys. Very well done, and very good hearings, very thorough. And also, as you mentioned, to the directors, the finance team, city manager, who worked very hard with each of these project development teams to come up with great recommendations. It is a signal achievement to get the budget moved forward. So thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, I think we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.